Which kills more Americans every year? Sharks or cows? Take a second. Picture both animals. Feel the difference in your gut. Most people say sharks instantly, without hesitation. The image of open water, a fin cutting the surface, that pulse of dread. It comes fast. Cows don't produce that feeling. Cows are slow. Cows are boring. Cows stand in fields. But in the United States, cows kill roughly 22 people per year. Sharks kill about 1. You just got the answer wrong. And the reason you got it wrong tells us everything about how the human brain actually estimates risk. Welcome to the Museum of Misperceived Danger. Your tour begins now. The building is enormous. Marble floors, high vaulted ceilings, long corridors stretching in every direction. But something is off. The exhibits aren't organized by actual danger level. They're organized by how vivid the fear feels, by how easily a terrifying image floods the mind. This museum was designed by 2 psychologists in 1973. Their names were Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. In a paper published that year, they introduced the availability heuristic. The core idea was deceptively simple. When people estimate the probability of something, they don't run statistical calculations. They ask a different question. How easily can I bring an example to mind? If the example comes fast, vivid, emotional, recent, the brain concludes the event must be common. If the example comes slowly or doesn't come at all, the brain concludes it must be rare. It's a shortcut. It works well enough in certain environments, but in the modern world, flooded with selective media and algorithmic amplification, this shortcut becomes a liability. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Inside, a great white shark moves through dark water. A small placard shows a chart. In 2022, there were 57 unprovoked shark attacks in the United States. 5 were fatal. That same year, swimming pools drowned roughly 800 people. Deer collisions killed around 200. Hornets, wasps, and bees killed 62. The shark has fewer kills than insects. And yet the word shark attack triggers a cascade of physical sensation that bee sting simply does not produce. The reason is availability. You have been shown sharks as threats thousands of times. Television specials, summer blockbusters, clickbait headlines. The imagery is embedded deep. Your brain has a thick, vivid file labeled shark right at the front of the mental cabinet. B gets a thinner file somewhere in the back. Psychologist Paul Slovic called this the psychometric paradigm of risk perception, published in Science in 1987. Slovic found that perceived risk correlates not with actual harm, but with factors like dread, unfamiliarity, and media salience. A risk that is involuntary, catastrophic, and invisible gets overestimated dramatically. A risk that is familiar and mundane gets underestimated, no matter how many people it kills. Driving is the textbook case. In a car, you are in control. The risk feels personal, manageable, chosen. In a plane, you have no control whatsoever. You are inside a metal tube at 35,000 feet, entirely dependent on systems you cannot see. And yet, per mile traveled, commercial aviation is dramatically safer than driving. The National Safety Council puts the lifetime odds of dying in a motor vehicle accident at roughly 1 in 100. The odds of dying in a plane crash are approximately 1 in 11,000. Your brain has that exactly backwards. A cockpit frozen at the moment before takeoff. On the wall, a graph of transportation fatalities per 100 million passenger miles. Cars, about 7.3 deaths. Commercial aviation, about 0.07. Flying is so much safer than driving that the comparison is almost absurd. You are more than 100 times more likely to die per mile in a car than on a commercial flight. And yet, after the September 11th attacks, millions of Americans made exactly the wrong decision. The footage of the Twin Towers, replayed hundreds of times across every screen, activated a terror so vivid that people couldn't board a plane. They drove instead. German psychologist Gerd Gigewenzer studied what happened next, publishing his findings in 2004 in Psychological Science. He estimated that approximately 350 additional Americans died in car accidents in the 3 months following September 11th, people who had switched from flying to driving out of fear. The availability heuristics death toll rivaled the number who died in the attacks themselves. The attack was a one-time event. The deaths it caused through the availability heuristic played out slowly, mile by mile, on rain-slicked highways across the country. Nobody counted them. Nobody saw them on the news. The walls are covered with newspaper front pages, every headline describing an attack. Television screens tuned to rolling news. It's designed to make you feel like violence is everywhere. And that feeling is the exhibit. Between 2001 and 2013, terrorism killed an average of roughly 6,000 people per year worldwide. In that same period, preventable medical errors in the United States alone killed approximately 250,000 people per year, the third leading cause of death behind heart disease and cancer, though this estimate remains debated. 250,000 versus 6,000. Yet terrorism received wall-to-wall coverage, generated entire government agencies, reshaped airport architecture globally, and became the defining anxiety of a generation. Medical errors received hospital internal reviews and occasional academic papers. Television news has a simple formula: vivid, visual, emotionally activating, and sudden gets coverage. Slow, statistical, invisible, and chronic gets ignored, regardless of how many lives it costs. In 2015, researchers analyzed U.S. television news and found that attacks by perpetrators identified as Muslim received disproportionately more coverage relative to deaths involved than attacks by other perpetrators. The attacks were real. The coverage disparity was a choice. And that disparity directly shaped public risk perception. Here is something worth sitting with. In the United States, violent crime rates dropped roughly 70% between 1993 and 2019. And in virtually every poll taken across those decades, a majority of Americans said crime was getting worse. In 2023, Gallup found that 77% of Americans believed crime was higher nationally than the year before. Actual FBI data showed violent crime had declined or held flat. The disconnect was almost total. Crime coverage didn't decline with the crime rate. If anything, local news expanded its crime segments. The result is that millions of people navigate the world with a mental map of danger drawn from television, not from the territory they're actually living in. The gap between map and territory? That's the availability heuristic at work. Trading floor decor. Screens everywhere. Numbers scrolling. When a stock makes the news, retail investors buy it. Psychologists Brad Barber and Terrence O'Dean, in a 2008 study in the Review of Financial Studies, found that individual investors are net buyers of attention-grabbing stocks. Stocks in the news, with large price changes or unusually high volume. The availability of the stock in the mind gets confused with the quality of the investment. The consequence is systematic. Stocks that make the news have typically already risen. The investor who buys after the headline is paying for availability, not for fundamentals. The same mechanism runs in reverse for crashes. After a market collapse, the emotional availability of catastrophe is overwhelming. Investors sell at the bottom, sit in cash for years, and miss the rebound entirely because the imagery of collapse is too vivid to allow re-entry. Odin found that individual investors who trade most frequently underperform the market by about 2 percentage points per year. Much of that underperformance is driven by availability bias, chasing what's newsworthy, fleeing from what's terrifying. A century of compound interest, quietly destroyed by a mental shortcut that evolved to track predators in the savannah. Giant novelty checks on the wall, a spinning lottery machine in the center, balloons and gold streamers. The odds of winning the Powerball jackpot are approximately 1 in 292 million. You are almost 600 times more likely to be struck by lightning than to win Powerball. Yet in 2023, Americans spent approximately $112 billion on lottery tickets. Lottery winners are highly visible. Their images are on billboards. Their stories are on local news. The entire advertising apparatus exists to make winning feel accessible, to increase availability. Losing produces no imagery, no billboard, no television segment. The losses are invisible and diffuse. The wins are loud and specific. In 1970, roughly half of American children walked or biked to school unsupervised. By 2010, that figure had fallen to around 13%. What changed? Crime fell dramatically over that period. Stranger abductions remained extremely rare. FBI statistics consistently showed they represented a tiny fraction of missing child cases. What changed was availability. The disappearance of Eitan Pates in 1979 marked a shift in media coverage. Cable news in the late 1990s and 2000s elevated individual cases into months-long national obsessions. The coverage created a statistical illusion that stranger abductions were a common threat rather than an extraordinarily rare event. Parents updated their behavior to match the illusion. Children denied unsupervised outdoor play lost years of developmental experience. Social problem-solving, risk calibration, autonomy, because their parents' availability heuristics had been warped by television. White walls, fluorescent lights, the texture of a hospital corridor. Doctors are not immune to availability bias. They may be especially vulnerable to it. When a physician encounters a cluster of symptoms, she runs a pattern-matching search through stored experience. If she recently treated several cases of a particular condition, that condition becomes highly available, and she's more likely to diagnose it even when the base rate is low. A 2014 review in the journal Diagnosis found availability bias to be one of the most consistently documented error sources in clinical reasoning. The problem is acute for rare but dramatic conditions that leave vivid impressions inflating their perceived frequency. The inverse is equally dangerous. Common but dull conditions can get underdiagnosed in the wake of a dramatic exotic case, because the exotic case is flooding the doctor's mental workspace. Medical students are now taught to counter this with base rate thinking. Before assigning probability to a diagnosis, consult the epidemiology. What is the actual frequency of this condition in patients with these symptoms? Force the statistics into the room rather than letting the vivid case take over. So who designed a brain that systematically substitutes vividness for probability? Evolution did. And it made sense. In the ancestral environment, Personal experience and tribal testimony were the only data sources. No statistics, no epidemiology. In that world, how easily can I recall an example tracked probability quite well? If you'd seen several people die from eating a certain berry, the vivid memory was a good proxy for the danger being real. The problem is, we no longer live in that world. A camera operator on one continent can film an event that shapes the emotional availability of dangers on another continent entirely. Editorial decisions by 10 people in a newsroom can inflate the perceived frequency of one type of death across an entire society. The availability heuristic was calibrated for local experience and honest anecdote. It's running in a world of global media, algorithmic content selection, and engineered emotional arousal. The mismatch is profound. In 2019, a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzed roughly 300 million tweets and found that negative emotional content spread faster and farther than neutral or positive content. Anger was the strongest predictor of viral propagation. Social media platforms were optimized for engagement. Engagement correlates with emotional arousal. Emotional arousal correlates with fear, outrage, and disgust. These feed the availability heuristic directly. The result is an environment where our mental availability files are updated in real time, at industrial scale, by systems whose incentive structure has nothing to do with accurate risk representation and everything to do with holding attention. In this environment, the availability heuristic isn't just a personal cognitive quirk. It's a vector for social manipulation. Whoever controls the imagery controls the fear. Whoever controls the fear shapes the risk perception. Whoever shapes the risk perception influences the votes, the purchases, the policies of hundreds of millions of people. Kahneman called this the "what you see is all there is" problem. WYSIATI. The brain doesn't reason from the full distribution of reality. It reasons from the sample made available to it. And that sample, in the modern world, is not random. It is curated. At the end of the tour, there's a small room with no exhibits, just a table and a chair and a set of tools. The corrective for availability bias is not the elimination of emotion. The goal is not to replace the vivid impression, but to audit it. The first tool is the base rate. Before accepting your emotional risk assessment, ask, what is the actual statistical frequency of this outcome? Don't let ease of recall substitute for the number. Find the number. Gigerenzer has argued that statistical literacy is one of the most important public health interventions available. A doctor who understands base rates prescribes better. A voter who understands base rates is harder to manipulate. A driver who knows comparative fatality rates makes better transportation choices. The second tool is the invisible comparison. When a risk becomes available in your mind, ask, what am I not seeing? The news covered the shark attack. What risks aren't being covered? The deaths from sedentary lifestyle, from air pollution, from medical error, from the cumulative effect of thousands of small, unvivid choices. These are the exhibits the museum forgot to build. The third tool is time delay. The availability heuristic feeds on recency. When you feel the spike of fear after a news story, give it 48 hours. Not to dismiss the feeling, but to wait for the emotional salience to decay enough that you can reason around it. Kahneman described the two systems architecture of the mind. System 1, fast, automatic, emotional, and System 2, slow, deliberate, statistical. The availability heuristic lives in System 1. The base rate check lives in System 2. You cannot eliminate System 1, but you can develop the habit of summoning System 2 at the moments it matters most. Outside, the city is loud. A siren in the distance. A car alarm. The ordinary noise of ordinary risk, diffuse and unframed. None of it is on the news tonight. Somewhere in the Pacific, a great white shark kills approximately 1 person per year. In a field in Ohio, cattle produce roughly 20 annual fatalities. In hospitals across the country, preventable errors claim hundreds of thousands of lives that never become front-page news. Your job is to notice the frame. Your job is to ask who hung the picture. Your job is to walk outside and look at the actual sky, not the one the museum curated for you, but the real one, where sharks are rare and cows are surprisingly dangerous, and the most significant risks of your life arrive slowly, quietly, and without making the